Apollo is truly a love letter. It's a love letter to the institution, to the artist who is there, to Harlem, to the people of Harlem, to the convening that took and continues to take place at the Apollo, which is, I think, so important for African Americans to have these safe places to come together, to dream, and to make change.
Welcome to the Visible Woman Podcast. I'm Corinne Corbett, and along with my co-host, Kim DeBrew, we talk about life as women of color, the things that challenge us, motivate us, and the things we need to celebrate in our lives and especially in our careers.
Remember when someone Black came on television when you were growing up, and it was an event, and the whole family would gather around the television, and it was exciting to see the performance or the miniseries or, on that rare occasion, go to the movies. That's because there's no denying that there's power in seeing your life and experiences reflected in arts and culture. At the center of these are the stories that drive the narrative. They reflect that we are not a monolith, and that is evidenced by a world where Steve McQueen, Jordan Peele, Ava DuVernay, Tyler Perry, Spike Lee, and Ama Asante can create projects that give us a myriad of experiences. But I'm old enough to say that I've seen that movie before. That's because interest in our stories have become a driver for Hollywood off and on. We ride a wave for a while, and then we're out of fashion again. But in an article in IndieWire last year pointed out that in the age of social media, where consumers have a platform to galvanize and demand change, things may have shifted. In 2018, there were 70 films where the central character was Black. In the past 2 years, films helmed by Black men were among the highest grossing films of all time. And a Black woman led a film project with a budget of over $100 million. On the other hand, studies like those published by USC Annenberg School and UCLA's Ralph J. Bunche School point to a continued lack of meaningful increases in diversity in front of and behind the camera. So those that decide to take up the challenge to bring our stories to life are indeed a rare breed.
So Corinne, to pick up on that point for a moment, I think the one thing that I worry about with regard to the lack of opportunities for Black folks, for Asian Americans, for Latinx, and American Indian actors and filmmakers is about the limitations of the stories being told. And what I mean by that is a single narrative, a single data point about what the human experience is for those communities. And I think one thing that happens is it's a ripe for an opportunity for stereotypes to be reinforced. The way that we know implicit bias works is that it's a shortcut the brain makes based on stimuli it's been exposed to, right? So if you are only exposed to a single image or a single type of experience, then that's what you believe a people is. And for this show, I'm drawn to a quote by Chimamanda Adichie, who I checked today, her Danger of a Single Story TEDx talk has now been viewed by 19 million people. So she says, that's how to create a single story, to show a people as one thing, as only one thing over and over again. And that is what they become. The single story creates a stereotype. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story the only story. And following up on your point about the USC study, and let's see, I think it's dated 2018, a quarter of Latinx speaking characters across 200 movies were depicted as criminals, portrayed as poor. 54% of Latinx characters depicted with a job were given jobs such as construction workers, farmers that do not require a college education. Further, the report examined the top 100 grossing movies from 2007 to 2018 and found that only 3% of films had Latinx actors or co-leads. Now, when you think about the demographics of this country and how they're changing, and thinking that in 2050, we will be a majority-minority country with Hispanics comprising 20% of movie-going audiences, I think the bar gets raised a lot for representation in front of the camera and behind the camera, and in complex ways, right? And in wise ways, in courageous ways. So I'm really thrilled, Corinne, that we are lifting up this topic today.
Yeah, it is. It is really sobering when you look at the statistics. And it makes it even more important to recognize the bravery and the vision of those who choose to take the storyteller's path. And today we're happy to welcome Lisa Cortes. She's an Academy Award nominated producer whose credits include Precious and the upcoming documentary, The Apollo. Her work with trailblazing companies such as Rush Artist Management, Def Jam Records, and Lee Daniels Entertainment have been distinguished by her commitment to empowering inclusive voices and giving light to challenging visionary stories. Her productions have received over 70 international awards and nominations, including the Academy Award. Prior to her film career, Cortes worked with Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin to launch the iconic Def Jam brand. Later, as Vice President of Artists and Repertoire at Mercury Records, she signed many multi-platinum and Grammy Award-winning artists and became the first African-American woman to have her own label deal at a major record company when she founded the iconoclastic label Loose Cannon Records. Since launching her production company, Cortes Films, she has collaborated with directors including Ernest Dickerson and Gabourey Sidibe, producing innovative features, documentaries, and short films that assert the centrality of diverse and untold stories while delighting audiences. She recently produced, with Academy Award-winning director Roger Ross Williams, a feature-length documentary about the legendary Apollo Theater, which I had the pleasure of seeing last night. It's amazing. And produced the documentary, The Remix, Hip Hop Times Fashion. Both films opened at the 2019 Tribeca Film Festival to great acclaim. So we're happy to welcome you today, Lisa.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you.
So how did you come to become a storyteller, a producer, and a director? What led you down this path from music?
Well, I think we have to rewind, selector, and go back in time a little bit to when I was a kid and how much I loved to read. Reading allowed me to travel all over the world in my imagination and to express feelings and just have an expansive worldview. So stories are part of like my structural integrity, you know, whether it was Dr. Seuss or Bible stories or Disney stories, I always found something in them that sparked my imagination. So I think, you know, in music, what I enjoyed were the stories and the voices, both literally and figuratively, of the artists I worked with. Yes, literally the timbre of someone's voice, but also what were they singing about? What was it that was their narrative as a performer? And I think that's why with Loose Cannon, there were so many different kinds of artists, because I was excited by what three sisters from Australia in an a cappella band called Titus were talking about. As much as I was interested in reissuing original classic records by Red Fox and Richard Pryor, or a new soul group from Canada. And so, it's what are you talking about? What are you about is always something that's there.
So the through line for you has always been the story.
Oh, yeah.
Even in the music, it's the story that's being told through the music.
Yeah, because I think the story is a part of defining the artist's voice, and it's an important part of then how you market and present them to the world. And I think, it's always like people are like, well, what's the log line for this documentary? Well, in a way, what's the log line for this artist? This artist is country western. They have this kind of background. They're known for exploring the following topics. I think that, the log line, even though it is different, can be applied to how a musician shows up and to how a story shows up.
Okay. I have a follow-up question. So what were the skills that you had to acquire, and which were the skills that you brought with you from music as you transitioned to film?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I got to a certain point in music when it was time for me to find another medium to work in. And I knew that I wanted to work in film. I spoke to friends who were in the film business, and they were like, oh, you've got to go to California. You can't stay in New York. You're going to have to get coffee for someone for 5 years. I mean, I don't mind getting coffee. I don't mind getting the dry cleaning. But I just was like, no, it's about New York for me. And I think inherently I understand the process of working with artists. And to me, the commonalities between making an album and making a film are that you are defining, what are the essential elements, the director, the script, the cast, the same thing that you do with a recording artist. You have that artist, but who's going to write the songs? Who's going to produce it? What studio are you going to be at? Do you want the spirit of Jimi Hendrix at Electric Lady when you record? So the process for me of finding talent, finding the right team to support the talent, working with the project from the discovery and development to the production, to the delivery, to working with everyone involved, to spending a lot of time with legal and finance. Those are all the same things that I do with a film when I'm producing it. I think there is some different vocabulary. There are some obvious different variables. With a music artist, sometimes you start out and you think it's going to be about this set of songs, and it changes. Obviously, with a film, you have a script. But interestingly enough, with a documentary, oftentimes you go in thinking you're going to tell the story one way, and you will discover characters and variables that will change that story, that will make you adjust the lens of how you're telling the story. But for me, overall, the process is the same. Find it, amplify, fine-tune it, find the team, present it to the world, hopefully.
Kim?
Hopefully, and absolutely. Clearly, it's been a successful endeavor. So I am curious about identity and how that has played into your movement through the various worlds. So your presence as a woman, as a person of color, and showing up in the various spaces with a story to tell. What would you say about the importance of your identity and showing up in those spaces?
I'm really lucky to have had the parents that I did, who made certain that I always had strong reflections of myself around me, and taught me to embrace my, I think like most Black folks, we have double consciousness. I think I have like, a myriad of consciousness, as a Black person, as a woman, as a Latinx person. My father's from Colombia, South America, as a global thinker. And sometimes I feel like I kind of take the 50,000 foot extraterrestrial perspective on things. But my parents supported and equipped me to have a passport and be a citizen of all of those spaces, and to always arm me with tremendous agency in those spaces. And so it's helped me tremendously because I've worked on projects that have taken me all over. I've worked with multiple genres of music. But I think what I always came back to in navigating them was, did it align with my passion? Did it enforce my desire to educate, to elevate, and to create empathy in the stories and the artists that I work with?
I love that: educate, elevate, and create empathy.
Those are my 3 E's.
It's almost your mission statement, so to speak.
Yes. And there is a fourth one, which is about evolution. And oftentimes as artists, that's the most difficult one to embrace, but an important part of our journey, to know when the things that are most comfortable don't really work for us anymore, that those house shoes got to go, and that we need to get some new ones. But maybe with little cha-cha heels and marabou feather.
How about that? So let's talk a little bit about, like, you've not, even when you made the shift into film, you didn't choose like the rom-com or you chose meaty stories to produce. Monsters Ball, The Woodsman, Precious. There are stories that are, to some would say, are difficult stories to tell, are rich stories to tell, are not always pretty stories to tell. What made you choose those kinds of projects?
Well, when I left music and I said I want to work in film, one of the steps that we haven't talked about is I went back to film school. Okay. Because I wanted to learn what the different crew did, and so that I could communicate to them and that I can understand what their needs are, because understanding their needs have to be factored into schedules, have to be factored into budgets. You need to be able to have conversations about compromises. And so I went back to film school to study not only production, but I also continued my study in film theory. I started working on a lot of independent films. To understand kind of all the moving pieces. I got a call one day from Lee Daniels, who said, I'm going to make this film in New Orleans. And I had known Lee for many years, and he knew that I was working to make this transition. And that started a wonderful collaboration where I was Lee's producing partner on so many of those great films and challenging films that you just mentioned. I think a part of the magic of working on those projects is that we had a desire to not tell the same stories that everyone else was doing, and to elevate these different voices, to play with casting, and that these are really rich, nuanced characters that we were not seeing, that we felt was a part of the mission to make bold, uncompromising films.
Yeah, and the challenging subject matter make them, bring up lots of emotions. But these are stories, when I talked earlier about seeing yourself reflected, people who've experienced some of the themes in The Woodsman and particularly in Precious are able to feel validated in some ways. And it's a really important component. It's not always funny. It's not the buddy comedy. It's not. It's important. It's not blaxploitation. To have these films available to us challenges us to see all of our stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of them.
Well, one of when I look back on that body of work, one of the themes that came up a lot was redemption. A lot of these films have monsters in them, whether it's Helen Mirren, who's a hit woman in Shadowboxer, whether it's Kevin Bacon, who in The Woodsman is a molester who's returned to his community. He's trying to come to terms with his past. Whether it is, Monique's character in Precious. All of these characters, whether they receive salvation or not, it was not really the kind of the end goal. It was exploring, I think, how all of us come to terms with those parts of ourselves that are challenged. And in particular, to the extreme with some of the more horrific characters, is there a space for forgiveness? And that's something that was revisited a lot through very different kinds of stories. But I think that is something that is a question that continuously has plagued and consumed us as humans for centuries, and makes for, I think, great characters and great tension.
So I wanted to just talk a little bit about, your most recent projects. So it was wonderful to see the documentary on the Apollo last night. And as I told you earlier, as we were waiting, that it had special meaning to me because my mom grew up in Harlem. My grandfather was the manager of the Harlem Y during the Depression. And so that, and, Percy Sutton was his friend, and all of those kinds of, seeing all of the story come to light and how impactful the Apollo was in not only the lives of Black people in Harlem, in Black America as well, or Black people in the world, but how you looked at the Apollo and its impact, the political and social context of Black Americans, and then the context of how that fit into the world, into that timeline. Can you talk a little bit about the process of creating that and finding the archival footage? And because it is a really, really rich story that kind of seamlessly to me weaves the present and the past.
Well, I think of all the projects that I have worked on, the Apollo is truly a love letter. It's a love letter to the institution, to the artist who was there, to Harlem, to the people of Harlem, to the convening that took and continues to take place at the Apollo, which is, I think, so important for African Americans to have these safe places to come together, to dream, and to make change. As with any film, it's about the director. And in this case, I always like to say that our true north is Roger Ross Williams, who really had the vision for this film and brought us, enabled me to join it. With Roger, I think one of the things that was difficult was we had 85 years of history, and it's like, what do we put in? What do we not put in? And so we had various timelines in the editorial room. Our editors, Jean Chen and John Fisher, did a phenomenal job. And so we'd go in the edit room and we'd see a timeline of Apollo history, of African-American music history, of African-American history, of Harlem history. And then as you look at this timeline, certain dates seem to be in alignment with the Apollo, with music, with cultural movements. So, you look at James Brown performing "I'm Black and I'm Proud," what's happening in the country at that time after the various assassinations of our beloved leaders in the community. And you look at visually James going from having like a conked hairdo to a fro. And so then you're like, oh, wow, that is a moment that everything comes together, and it speaks on a multiplicity of levels to this focal point that the Apollo is playing a major role as a character in driving this narrative forward. And so then, of course, the archival process goes hand in hand with it, because you can see it on your timeline on the wall, but then you need to find the footage. So in some cases, there's Getty and there's wonderful archival, houses like that. But, what Roger always asked for and pushed for was, let's find other archival that people haven't seen before. And that's when the fun part of the journey began. We had a great team of archivists. And then also, like, sometimes I would go and sit with someone's grandmama and she'd pull out a box of pictures, and we'd spend breakfast, lunch, and dinner together going through the pictures, but we would uncover things that had never been seen before. What I discovered with this film about archival for African American history is that, unfortunately, at times there are gaps where you really wish that there was documentation. But unfortunately, our history is such that oftentimes we've had to leave our homes in the middle of the night. Our homes were destroyed. Those artifacts were destroyed. And what we hope with this film is that it does two things: that it plants down a flag for the rich archival that's there, and I think in a way hopefully becomes inspirational for us to continue to find and donate our archival to museums and libraries, to make certain that our legacy, our ancestors, are not forgotten.
Yes. So this is going to be the Apollo documentary is going to be seen on HBO. When is that coming?
On November 6th on HBO, and November 8th at the Metrograph Theater here in New York, and November 1st at the Laemmle in Los Angeles.
It's an amazing thing, and it is such a wonderful journey. And one of the things I enjoyed also last night was that Leslie Uggams was actually there, so there was an opportunity to hear both of your perspectives on the Apollo experience, and how the Apollo was almost different from the Chitlin Circuit in many ways, and how she said it was her, Miss Uggams said it was her university.
Yes.
That she learned so much watching women like Ella Fitzgerald and Dinah Washington and many others in how they conducted their business. So it was an amazing opportunity to hear that.
Yeah, it's what's great with Miss Uggams is she was so young when she started, and so she had this opportunity to work like Louis Armstrong, and she sat and she studied every single artist, and you can tell she really took it to heart. It informed her discipline and perspective as an artist, and she has been so generous with the documentary in sharing, her thoughts and recollections.
Great. Now, you had another film at Tribeca, the Hip Hop Times Fashion, the remix.
The remix, Hip Hop Times Fashion.
Yeah.
Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the remix.
Yeah. And what I saw the trailer, and I know many of the people in the film also, but it just kind of gave me joy to see that, but also just to see that our podcast is Visible Women. To see somebody like Misa Hilton get the recognition, to get the spotlight, to have an opportunity to talk about her perspective, and for us to really understand the force that she had in the industry is really important. So what made you want to do that film?
So for many years, I have wanted to tell the stories of women who were behind the scenes in hip hop. Hip hop is like part of my foundation.
Right.
And there were so many incredible women that I came up with who were not artists, but were integral to the culture and moving it forward. And I found that so many hip hop narratives were told very narrowly from a man's perspective. And I'm like, but we've been there from the beginning, like as we always say, Kool Herc's sister Cindy Campbell, she threw the party that he first performed and shared the genius of what he created. And so I started a project many years ago that didn't come together. And then this opportunity came up to pitch an idea. And I spoke to Emil Wilbekin. We talked about some people, and he said, Lisa, let's sit down with Misa. And we sat down with Misa, and I thought, like, wow, I knew about her, but as I talked to other people who were not intimate with fashion or music, they didn't know, but they knew what she had done. And as a storyteller of giving voice to the unseen, I was like, okay, like now this is going to help drive this. And I spoke to a wonderful young woman, Farah X, who joined me as my co-director on the project. And we all just really loved this idea of what was happening, what had happened with Misa. And then interestingly, through the course of filming, what ended up happening. I don't want to give away anything so when people see it, but there's a lot of really fantastic things that Misa and we were able to capture that she was a part of in the last year that shifted culture and reintroduced her to a whole new audience.
I think that's incredible. It's just incredible. And just the point of the visibility and giving, like that we often say that we, in this podcast, that we see you. And when someone's a professional that has been doing work and in some ways is unsung, an unsung hero, so to speak, or heroine, it's wonderful to have an opportunity to see her shine. I can't wait to see the whole thing.
Well, Corinne, for me, where it comes from is a historical and spiritual understanding of the role of Black women. We started it all. Many years ago, I did a documentary called Imagine a Future. And and you can find it on YouTube. And it was done with Procter & Gamble and Black Girls Rock. And we took this young woman from Dover, Delaware, Jeanette, to South Africa to have a conversation about beauty and identity. And the reason why we took her there is, one, she had never left the country, and I love this whole fish out of water. Let's put somebody in a new environment, and how are they going to define themselves, and what is that journey going to be like? And in our journey through South Africa, we went to the Eastern Cape, where Saartjie Baartman, who's known as the Venus Hottentot, is from. We met people from her tribe, and Jeanette spoke with them about the tragedy of Saartjie Baartman and her being abducted and brought to England and France, and her body exhibited as a physical, scientific specimen. But at the end of this trip in South Africa, we brought her to this place called the Cradle of Humankind. And Jeanette walked around with an anthropologist, and he took her to a place where they had found the remains of one of the oldest women on earth. And I got chills when this white South African dude says to this young girl, like, it began here. It began with African women. This is the underlying DNA of everything. So that's what I talk about fake news, because fake news might not be talking about this, but that this is real, this is science, and this is a big part of what I put in my tank when I take on projects, when I tell our stories, because of this reclamation of our place in the cosmos.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. So our time is, I can't believe it. It's wrapping up. So I really want to get one more question in before Corinne closes this out. So you are putting an amazing amount out into the world. And my question is, what are you getting back? What is coming back to you as a result of your offering?
The return on investment is on many levels. I think one is the great joy I have when I meet people who are inspired to tell their story, to pick up that camera, to put together a team, to go forth and slay, as I encourage them to do. Because there is room for all of us to be in the space as storytellers. I also get a return, of like the sacrifices I make, and that if people say they are educated, they hear the call to action, then I know that the intention that I poured into it has been transferred. Being of service is something that is very important to me. It is a privilege what I do, and I know the responsibility that comes with that privilege. I know the responsibility handed down to me by my parents, who made tremendous sacrifices and who always advocated for equality and advancement for our community. And so that if all of those things are coming and working together, then that is when the return on investment is triple-fold.
Yeah. That's amazing. That is really an amazing way to go to work. There's so many times there are people who work because they have to. But when you find a vocation that pours into you and as you toil, as you create, as you do, you're planting seeds, and you're seeing the evidence of what you've planted, but then you're also passing seeds on to others so that they can plant their own and create. And it gives us, it gives me hope that, as I talked about earlier, that, our stories will live on, not just the Apollo, but all the myriad stories that we have yet to tell.
Yeah, and it's a great time. I have to say, I'm in love with Black Lady's sketch show. Right?
Yes, I love it.
Like, we think of the evolution of the sketch show, and that show is incredible. And what I know will happen is the platform it's given to so many of the talent involved is then going to allow for them to spin off and do films and do whatever, and to keep shaking up this landscape and reasserting ourselves in it with the broadness of our beauty, talent, and as you said, the multiplicity of ourselves.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Well, this has been such a great experience, Lisa. We cannot thank you enough for joining us. And for our listeners, if you have not seen some of the projects that Lisa has worked on, Shadowboxer, Woodsman, Precious, Monsters Ball, and especially these two upcoming projects, The Apollo, which will be on HBO, but which also will be in theaters in New York and LA, and the remix, Hip Hop Type Fashion, which we're hoping will come to someplace we can see it soon.
Yes, very soon we'll be able to share our distribution for that film, which is really exciting.
Yeah, so look out for the announcement on that. And if you are a student of fashion or of hip hop, this is probably something you would want to look at. And also, it's important that you see the diversity of stories that are out there. So I encourage you to look at some of the other the people in film that we've discussed earlier and some of their body of work, and just expand your horizons.
I think for the audience, just really quickly, support festivals like Urban World, Bronze Lens, Black Star, and Sidewalk in Birmingham, Alabama. Go to film festivals. Go and see 4 films a day. Things that stretch, like, oh, you might not think you're interested in that genre, but go in and sit and learn and expand. That's what I did. I saw a ton of films, and I still do to this day. But I think that there's incredible work being done by the programmers at film festivals who are giving us so much to look at. Just Google, what's the film festival coming near me? I know Urban World is approaching in September here in New York, and there's so many others who throughout the year. You don't have to just go to Sundance or Toronto. There is probably a film festival in your city or in 100-mile radius that you can go to.
That's great advice. Thanks again for being with us. That's our show for today.
Thanks for listening to the Visible Women podcast with myself, Kim DeBrew, and co-host Corinne Corbett. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our website at visiblewomenpodcast.com, or please leave us a review on iTunes or your podcast listening platform of choice. Look for the latest installment of the Visible Women podcast every other Wednesday. Until then, here's to all the visible women out there. See us now.